Welcome to Right on Track, a songwriting podcast. Thanks to Tone for tuning in. I'm Demi Michelle Schwartz, and I'm thrilled you're joining me on my songwriting journey. So kick back and relax, don't fall flat, and remember, stay right on track. Hey everyone, welcome back to Right on Track. Joining me today is Connor Frost. Hey Connor.
How you doing? Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm doing fantastic. I'm delighted to have you on the show today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, surviving winter as best I can, and yeah, doing what I like to do, which is speak about songwriting related things and art related things on a podcast. So yeah, it's really good to
Yeah.
be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Love chatting about songwriting and music related things as well. And I cannot wait to do so with you. But before we dive into our chat today surrounding songwriting and perfectionism, I would love for you to share a little about yourself and your musical journey so far.
Sure. Yeah. I guess I'll give the abridged version. So, yeah, I've been a musician my whole life. Grew up playing piano, started at age 5. Eventually, started to play trumpet, started to play a little jazz as well as classical. But then in high school, I really fell in love with songwriting, joined my first band, and then fronted my first band in college. And it's really been my life ever since then, have been writing songs pretty constantly, pretty consistently since that point. And as I went along that journey, I also discovered my love for teaching. So I taught guitar, I taught Mandarin Chinese, I speak Mandarin as well. And so I just fell in love with teaching. And all roads kind of connected to coaching, songwriting, and mentoring artists, which is what I do now and what I've done for the better part of 5 years now. And yeah, I guess kind of just a combination of experience, passion, and art kind of got me to this point.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I really love when musicians, songwriters, they take the coaching path because I think when you get into any kind of art form, the approach is so subjective and there are so many different perspectives. But it's really great when you have the experience that you can teach someone else while also sharing your own experiences, own journey, that kind of thing. But at the same time, meeting the other person where they're at and helping them discover their own path as well. So I think it's really great how coaches step into that role.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that's I mean, couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly what I try to do. You basically summed it up perfectly.
Yeah, yeah, because I've had quite a few songwriting mentors, and I've definitely seen the ones that allowed me to be myself and be authentic and learn along the way. They helped me grow more than the ones who were like, this is what you have to do, and this is a rule, and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like, I think it's really important to recognize how art is subjective and everybody has their own approaches.
Yeah, I've always said, and this is what me and my team try to practice, is that a good coach isn't going to give you the answers. A good coach is going to empower you to find the right answers.
Right.
So that's definitely something that I try to live by.
Yes, absolutely. I love that so much. So now let's shift into our quote for this episode. Can you read that?
Yeah. So the quote is: "The most valuable thing you can make is a mistake. You can't learn anything from being perfect." And that quote is from Adam Osborne.
So, what does this mean to you?
What does this mean to me? Well, first and foremost, I completely agree. I think that mistakes are learning experiences, right? And I'm a big proponent of learning by doing as opposed to learning before doing. And so the idea that as you are learning, you are making mistakes, or as you are going through this journey, you are making mistakes, you are accruing learning experiences along the way. I feel like those are the learning experiences that will compound and ultimately pave the path that you're on and allow you to continue improving in this craft and growing as a person and whatever it might be. And the other side of it, that you can't learn anything from being perfect side of this, I would say perfect is not it doesn't exist. You know, maybe certain certain aspects of perfection can exist if you're trying to match up a particular shape with another. You're trying to fit a certain shape into another shape or whatever it might be. There might be technical versions of what perfect is, but from an artistic standpoint, I would argue that perfect doesn't exist, and in trying to chase perfect, we are chasing a ghost, right? So I would even go as far as to say is that there is no perfection, and therefore we can't learn anything through trying to achieve something that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I completely agree with that perspective. I think art, because of the nature of it, you cannot achieve perfection through that.
Right.
And I really like this quote because I definitely see obstacles as learning experiences. I don't really see them as mistakes or failures because
I would agree.
it's just stepping stones to get you to learn and grow and reach your goals. And I have learned, I feel like, more from the roadblocks than the good moments, because the good moments paid off. They showed me what I was doing was working. But the mistakes that you can call mistakes, or the roadblocks, obstacles, they made me really stop and reconsider, okay, what did I do that got me into this situation? How can I get out of it? And most importantly, how can I do better next time? And so I
Yeah,
think as we go through life as songwriters, and just in our personal lives too, whenever we hit these obstacles, when we overcome them, we get more knowledge, we get more depth to these experiences, and we become more wise overall. And about the perfection thing, I think that as songwriters specifically, if you have a mindset of this song needs to be perfect, number one, it's never going to be perfect. And if you keep revising it over and over and over, you're never going to share it because there's always things you can be changing all the time. You'll always get different opinions if you're getting feedback and all of that. But beyond that, I think having a perfectionist mentality will really put a roadblock in your creativity, because
right.
I consider myself to be growing beyond a perfectionist. Like I was for a very long time. I'm not really like that anymore. But when I was, I would always like get into this zone of like, oh, is this line good enough? Is this melody good enough? And I noticed that the flow would stop because I'm so fixated on making something perfect instead of letting the creativity guide me.
Totally. I would say perfectionism is fear in disguise,
Yeah.
right? Like if you are so concerned with something being perfect and you are labeling yourself a perfectionist as almost like this flex, right? I think there's something deeper going on there, and that's worth addressing. As painful as it can be to kind of like face those realities of why am I so obsessed with being perfect? If you can identify the root cause of that, it's going to allow you to create more freely, kind of like what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's funny. I think growing up, like I always, whenever I heard like, oh, like they're such a perfectionist, like I think I always heard it or interpreted it as like a positive
Right,
thing,
right. Yeah, yeah.
right? But now that I've gotten older, having experienced feelings of perfectionism over the last 10 to 15 years, I've learned that perfectionism is in fact not something to boast about, perhaps, but something that is worth addressing.
Yeah, for sure. And I absolutely love how you said perfectionism is fear in disguise. I completely agree. And whenever somebody considers themselves to be a perfectionist, you're right. I think there is a root to that. And as songwriters, what do you think are some of the common reasons why someone may feel like they need to shoot for perfection?
Yeah, so I think if you shoot for perfection, you are ultimately going after something that doesn't exist. And as long as you're going after something that doesn't exist, you don't have to actually put yourself out there and share your art with the world, right? So you're constantly like pining for something better. And it's almost this form of procrastination where you're saying, oh, well, it's not ready yet. It's not ready yet. It's not ready yet, right? And if the overarching fear is putting yourself out there, then you can use perfectionism as kind of this reason to not do it because you can always say it's not perfect yet. It's not quite there yet. Right. So I think like that's, I guess, perhaps a little bit more of an abstract interpretation, but I really think that's what it comes down to is this fear of one putting themselves out there, and two being judged for what they put out there.
Yeah.
And so perfectionism is this. almost this hack, right? It's like people who, and I'm one of them, right, who like consume a lot of like songwriting books, right? Books on songwriting, or they watch a lot of like songwriting YouTube videos about the craft, and so they're always taking notes, right? They're always taking notes. They're always leveling up their craft, but they're not implementing that, right? And so I think if you can always say, "Well, it's not perfect yet, it's not ready yet," then you are keeping yourself from facing this fear of putting yourself and your music out into the world.
Right. You also said too about it being sort of like procrastination, and I definitely think so because especially when you're not giving a deadline, if no one's telling you you need to release this song tomorrow or
Right.
next week, then you can keep pushing it off and pushing it off and pushing it off. And like I am also an author as well, and kind of tying into this, in January, I saw a submission call for an anthology and I like wanted to write something for it. And I wrote it and I shared it with some of my friends. I wrote a short story and like the deadline was like coming and I had to get it in because I saw this last minute. And I sent it to some of my friends and I was like, I don't know if it's good enough. And they're like, girl, literally the deadline is tomorrow. You got to turn it in. And I can't say a whole lot about it because it hasn't been like publicly announced yet, but it
That's fair.
did get selected. And so I think, yeah.
Nice.
So I think like this just goes to show that like you are creating good things even if you don't have that pressure of releasing or sharing something. I think like when you get that kick up the butt, like you absolutely have to do it. You like force yourself to, but I think there definitely is a procrastination like, oh, I can revisit this one more time. Let me do one more
Right.
revision. Let me do one more thing. And then it will never end. The perfectionist mindset can come from the fact that we are absorbing so much incredible music all the time, especially looking at mainstream artists, very successful songwriters. And when I started, I kind of struggled with the fact, like, how could I ever be that good? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of the fear comes from, too, like looking at all the other songs that are being released and all the other successes that songwriters are having and wondering if you're good enough to get there. And there definitely is a fear of judgment, too. And just putting it really clear here that art is subjective, and so no matter who is releasing something, any kind of art, like movies, film, whatever, like there's going to be people who love it and there's going to be people who hate it. And so I think the sooner you kind of get over the fact that some people aren't going to like your work, the easier it will be to share stuff. Because I've definitely seen like some reviews of my music that weren't the nicest, and I was like,
Right.
okay, that's fine. It wasn't your cup of tea. I'll move on. Like, you can't let that get under your skin. And I think, being afraid of criticism definitely can contribute to wanting to be perfect to avoid that criticism when perfection, like you said, doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think I'd take it even a step further. Sometimes I don't even think it's about fear of being criticized. I think it's fear of being perceived as someone who is trying, right? And
Oh,
if you're
yeah, yeah.
someone, and if you're someone who's trying, then there's this fear of failure, right? And to be perceived as a failure is terrifying, right? No one wants to be perceived as a failure, and I've certainly been there, but I think it even extends beyond the actual songs. I think it actually is about the individual and their journey, and fear of being perceived as a failure, someone who tried and failed, right? Someone who spent a lot of time, invested a lot of money on a song, and they put it out into the world, and no one listened to it, right? The thought of someone like uh, realizing that or witnessing that, and then turning around in their minds and saying, "Oh, this person is a failure," I think plays a large role in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. And going off of that too, I feel like for me personally, I enjoy seeing songwriters and artists, no matter where they are on their journey, sharing the struggles that they're facing along the way, because it just puts into perspective that they are trying, they are hitting roadblocks, they are finding success along the way. And in general, it just makes them feel more human and just like everybody else. No matter what you're doing in life, you're going to have great days and you're going to have bad days. And there are some artists that I follow that only post about the good stuff and they paint their life as golden and nothing goes wrong and all that. And I think it creates a false expectation, especially in the day of social media when everybody's putting their best things online. It can be perceived as they're doing perfect and I'm not. When really you have no idea what is going on behind the scenes. You don't know how many mistakes they've made before they had the success. You don't know what they're currently dealing with and they're not posting publicly. And so I think social media creates this false perception that people's lives are perfect in the entertainment industry when they're not.
Totally. Yeah. And I think I think so, and I empathize certainly. But I think also like social media has been around long enough now that, I think we need to learn to anticipate certain things like this, right? And learn how to fight against some of these feelings of comparison, that we come across, whether that's viewing someone's life through a social media lens or whatnot. And yeah, I think it all just plays into um, comparison. What do they say? Comparison is the thief of joy. I don't have a source for that quote, but I hear it all the time. So allowing yourself to, yeah, just compare yourself to yourself and only yourself, and take those steps each day, and just keep moving forward, and whatever other cliches I can think of.
No, that's perfect. I really like the idea of comparing yourself to yourself because I do that all the time. Like, I reflect back and go, okay, this is where I was in 2019. This is where I am now. Since I started releasing music until now, and growth has happened substantially. And I think, like, whenever somebody takes a step back and reflects on their life, don't compare yourself to others because everybody's on their own path. They're doing their own thing. And you need to keep your eyes on your own paper and do your own thing. But when you can reflect back on things you've done, you can see the moments of taking risks and putting yourself out there. If you have released a single song, you have taken a risk and you did put yourself out there. And I think the more you reflect back and say, okay, these are the things I did, and these are the steps I took forward because of that, I think it puts into perspective that you are progressing, even if it can feel like you're not. And something I love to do, and I still do it. Since like I want to say like March 2021, I started doing this. On my website, I have a blog, and every month I do a wrap blog where I share everything I did that month. And I still do it to this day every single month. And what I found is that during months where I was down on myself and doubting myself and thinking I wasn't doing anything, I always had multiple things to write about. And reflecting back, like, that's accumulation of all the things I've done. And the cool thing is when you're taking small steps, like day to day, week to week, even, you can think like you're not progressing. But then when years go by and you actually look back and look at the earlier things to now, you can see the progression. And so that's just one way of doing it. And I do that as well to kind of not only document what I'm doing, but also share with everybody what I'm doing. And that may not be everybody's cup of tea to share their journey like that, but even if you just do it privately, maybe like keep a diary or a journal and write down things you did that month or things like that. And just to remind yourself that you are doing things and you are taking steps forward, even if you feel like you are at a standstill.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you do that. And I think reflection is important. In our songwriting community that I run for clients that work inside my program, we have a wins section where we post wins that occurred, through the program or even outside the program. And I think that's really important to celebrate those, because the non-wins tend to get amplified, and it's important to acknowledge the wins for sure.
Yeah, and the smallest wins are so important. I think people only consider wins to be these massive big things, but it's really the small things that matter, especially if
Yeah.
you're having a bad day or a bad month. The small things you can say, okay, I wrote a song this month, or I recorded a demo this month. Like, just the smallest things can make you realize that you are taking steps forward. They don't need to be massive leaps all the time because every month isn't going to be weighted equally, but
Right.
you will have small wins. And I think celebrating those is really, really important.
And I would argue that you can't get big wins without the small
Oh,
wins,
right.
right?
Absolutely.
So it's the small wins that compound, right? Yeah, maybe that's finishing your first song, right?
Right.
Recording your first demo in GarageBand or Logic, right? Reaching out to that first prospective producer, right? It's those small wins that are going to accumulate in order for you to be able to really move the needle and move forward in your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So, shifting back to the actual songwriting, for anyone who is at that songwriting stage and they just can't seem to finish a song because they're in a perfectionist mindset and they can't get the courage to share their work in fear of judgment, what advice do you have of pushing through that to finish a song, share it, that kind of thing?
For sure. So I think one of them kind of goes to what we were just talking about, which was small wins. And so what I would say is think in missions. Okay, and these are this is a term that I use with my students. Right, get really specific about what you want to accomplish as it relates to your songwriting each week. So an example might be finish writing lyrics for verse number 2 of song number 1, right? Get really, really specific because if you write something in your planner that's like, write songs for 15 minutes a day, right? There's nothing tangible there that you can really work towards. So the more specific you can get, the more of that rush you're going to feel when you're able to kind of check something off the box and simultaneously be able to finish songs and take that next step with your songwriting. So I would think in missions, and I would also think in small wins, kind of like what we're talking about. I definitely think that's a big thing in terms of being able to just carry out, you know, the craft each and every week, which is certainly not easy.
Yeah, for sure. I love that so much. And I think another thing too is that getting feedback on your work is really important. I do it for every single thing I do. And I think when you're in a perfectionist mindset and you're afraid to let it go, maybe find some friends who are songwriters or just fans of music that you trust, maybe family even and close friends, and say, hey, can I share this song with you? See what you think. And you will get good feedback. You may get some suggestions, but I think taking small steps for sharing your work definitely helps because I just, like, reflecting back, like, I don't think I could have ever just shared a song on all platforms without having anybody close to me, like, hear it and give me feedback or something first, and so I think sometimes we have this mindset of, "Oh, no, like, I gotta write the song, record it, and share it with the world," and that can seem really scary, and so I think finding a group of people you trust and I still do this, like, every time I write a song, I have my little group that I send it to, like, "Hey, do you like this?" That kind of thing for feedback, and that helps me kind of recognize what I'm doing is good and it's working, and that helps me break out of the self-doubt a little bit, so when I share it, like, on all the platforms, I feel more confident about that release.
Totally. And I would take it a step further and say when you do get that feedback, just make sure you're clear on what to work on next, right? So if there is feedback that you receive that is telling you to improve in certain areas, kind of like what I was saying before with the missions, get really clear. Get really clear on what those next steps could be and get really specific about them so that you can actually improve the song, right? Rather than just like getting the feedback and receiving that, you know, temporary high of people saying they like your song, right? Really hone in on like, okay, what steps can I take now to improve this song, or what steps can I take now to get closer to whatever the goal is as it relates to this song. And then I did want to add one other thing to the last question of how people with a perfectionist mindset can battle through and finish songs. I also wanted to say that you should think in drafts, right? This idea that you need to write the perfect song in one draft is just not possible, right? And
Doesn't
so
happen.
it just doesn't happen, right? And so I forget there's some quote and I don't have the source for it, but basically the idea, and I don't even have the exact quote, but basically the idea is that the art comes not from the first draft but from the rewrite, you know, and you can't get to the rewrite unless you finish the first draft, right? So just embracing that the process is going to be in drafts, and understanding that it may take a few drafts to kind of get to where you want to get to.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that so much, and I'm really resonating with that both as a songwriter and author because I think some of the perfectionists mindset can come from too. Say you have written a bunch of songs, released an album, have music out, and gotten good feedback from it. Then when you go to write another song, you can think, oh man, like this isn't as good as that song was. But then think about how many revisions that song went through before you got it to the form that you shared it with.
Totally.
And with the writing too, like last year, probably from like January to October, I was revising manuscripts before I signed with my agent. Like I was going all these revisions, all these revisions. And
Yeah.
then in November, I wrote a brand new book and I hadn't drafted in a very long time because I was doing a bunch of revisions. And I was talking to my one friend, like when I started drafting, I was really struggling, which was like weird for me because I usually don't. And I was talking to my one friend and she's like, yeah, because you've been revising, like you're used to seeing your work polished and your work isn't going
Yeah,
to be
yeah.
polished in this draft. And then once you told me that, I was like, oh yeah, I can revise it. And then that completely broke my block. And so sometimes it can come
Totally.
from looking back at your old work and seeing what you've done and then having a fear of not being able to do that again.
Totally, and that's why I think it's so valuable to have a mentor guide you through the process because it can be very confusing if you haven't been through the process, right?
Right.
Like, because sometimes we don't know what we don't know, right? And so learning, even like learning these things of what comes next, right? Whether that's the recording process, the mixing process, even just like understanding what the expectations are of you after each part of the process from an idea to a song can be really confusing, right? So that's why I'm all about having mentors, working with people who have been there, who know, who are a couple steps ahead, because you're going to save yourself a lot of confusion, a lot of headache, and probably a lot of time in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, and for sure, like definitely relate because when I first started, you're right, there's so much, and a lot of it is like unspoken stuff, and you can only learn it by really immersing yourself in it and doing it. Kind of like what you said at the beginning, like you learn by doing, not by,
Right.
planning before you get into it. And I
Right.
think, like when I first started, I think a lot of my like block came from all the things I didn't know and like all the mistakes. I was like, well, I wouldn't have done that if I knew I had to do this instead, like, because nobody told me. And so I think for sure, and I think that's a big reason for, starting this show too, because I've learned a lot of things, and you and all the other guests I've had on have such great insights to share from their own experiences and journeys. And I think just finding sources of knowledge and listening to other people's experience, the good and the bad, you can learn a lot from others' obstacles and roadblocks just as much as their successes. And I think that's why, as songwriters, it's important to be open about our experiences and not gatekeep golden advice and things like that because, like there are people who have a passion for music and they want to do this, but it can be very daunting if they don't really have any guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I really resonate with that, and I think it's so important to not gatekeep and to share your struggles. I mean, a lot of my podcast episodes for my podcast are, outlining those struggles. They like some of them are literally called like three struggles I experienced with my songwriting, or like or my last or the one that I have coming out next week is it took me 18 months to write a song. Like
Yeah.
I think there's so many lessons that can be learned regardless of where you are in your journey from those mistakes, from those struggles. Really important to share them, and also just important to let people know that they're not alone in
Yeah,
that,
yeah.
right? Regardless of what quote unquote level you are at. Those feelings don't go away. Struggles don't go away. That feeling of perfectionism, imposter syndrome, whatever else, it doesn't go away. It just changes, and the more experience you get, the more apt you are at being able to manage those feelings, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the thing. It definitely doesn't go away. And I think the sooner you recognize that this is part of the process, I think the easier it will be. Because if you look at anybody, no matter where they are on their journey, they are facing challenges too. And that's just part of being in a creative industry, not only from the inspiration and the craft side, but the business is always changing. And
Right.
as things change, you need to adapt to those changes. And it's going to be challenging to pivot from time to time and go along with how the business is changing and all of the things. Like, there's so many things that can contribute to having to make changes and having to overcome obstacles. And that's just part of being a songwriter. And so I think we love music, we love the craft, we have a passion for it. But in order to get any kind of success in the business, we have to share our work. We have to overcome fears of perfectionism and all of those things and really watch what's going on around us and adapt where necessary.
Totally, 100%. Couldn't agree more.
Perfect. Well, Connor, it was lovely having you on the show. Just to wrap up, what are some final thoughts you would like to share about songwriting and perfectionism?
Yeah, just to kind of recap, I guess, mistakes are learning experiences, and to view them as such, I feel like I've gotten to a point where I will literally be like, okay, both with songwriting and my business, I will literally be like, okay, in order for me to like know where I'm going with a certain verse or with a certain business decision or whatever, I need to make mistakes in order to get information that I need, right? So it's almost this like testing process. So I would say mistakes are learning experiences. And then the other thing that I said was learn by doing, not learn before doing, right? Learning by doing is always going to be more valuable because, that book that you read about songwriting, like, doesn't really mean much unless you pick up a pencil afterwards, right? So learning by doing is going to be a really crucial, I guess, mindset to lock into as you journey through the songwriting experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What a phenomenal chat. It was lovely having you on the show.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and I love everything that you're doing. I'm inspired by you. I'm an aspiring author myself,
Oh, yay.
and it's one of those things where some of these things that we're talking about, I'm feeling very heavily because it is a world that is so different to me. I've
Yeah.
just been in music for so long, and so it's really cool to hear your story, and I'm definitely inspired by it.
Yeah, oh, well, I'm happy about that, and good luck with that, and also, just before we go, I would love for you to share with everybody where they can connect with you online and check out all that you offer.
Sure. Yeah. So first place, I would say main place is on Instagram. So if you go to Connor L Frost, CONNORL Frost at Connor L Frost, I am there. You will see me. Shoot me a follow. I'll probably send you a DM at some point, if that's cool. And then and then the other place is that I actually have a free training that is. Based largely around song structure, but song structure in a way to help you finish writing your songs. So if you go to connorfrost.com, CONNOR Frost, FROST/structure landing, you will be able to get that. It's like a free 20-minute training to help you finish your songs and use song structure to be able to help you finish the song. So that is yours and it is free, and I hope you grab it.
Awesome, well, thank you so much again for joining me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, fantastic, and listeners, I hope you enjoyed this chat with Connor Frost all about songwriting and perfectionism, and of course, until next time, stay
Stay
right
right
on
on
track.
track.